I never thought I'd be one of those guys who ends up getting blindsided by his wife cheating on him, but here I am. My name's Mark, and I've been with Lisa for about 8 years now. We met in college. She was smart, confident, the kind of woman who could talk her way out of anything. I always thought we had a good thing going. We had our ups and downs, sure, but I never imagined she'd do anything to hurt me intentionally. The trouble started subtly. At first, I just noticed she was working late more than usual. I'd come home from work and she'd be glued to her phone, her face oddly tense. She'd brush it off with these bitchy little comments like, "I'm just catching up on some work emails." Or, "It's nothing, Mark, stop being so paranoid." But I could tell she was lying. Her lies got more elaborate, the excuses about meeting friends, running errands, and urgent calls. Yet her phone was always close, and every now and then I'd catch her deleting texts or clearing out her message history. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe she was just stressed at work. Or maybe she was hiding something minor. Still, I kept an eye on her. Then I noticed her mood swings. One day she'd be sweet, almost overly nice, and the next she'd be bitchy, snapping over nothing. She started dressing differently too, more revealing, more provocative, especially around her friends. She'd always been pretty, but suddenly she was flaunting it more. I'd ask her about it, and she'd roll her eyes, say I was just jealous or paranoid, which made me feel like I was losing my mind. But then I found something that changed everything. It was late one night around 2 a.m. and I couldn't sleep. I decided to check her phone. I'd always been careful about respecting her privacy, but something felt off. When I unlocked her phone, I saw a series of messages from someone named Chris, which I didn't recognize. The texts weren't friendly, they were flirtatious, downright sexual in places. She was calling him babe, describing how she loved the feeling of being desired, and she even joked about sneaking away for a quick hookup during her lunch breaks. My stomach sank. I scrolled through more chats and realized this wasn't just a one-time thing. These messages went back weeks. I found photos, her in a revealing dress, leaning into someone I didn't know, kissing him in a car. The worst part was the timing. She was supposed to be at the hospital for her research trials. That's when I remembered she'd started going to this clinical trial recently, something about an experimental treatment for her degenerative disease. She'd been so secretive about it, and now I understood why. She was testing some drug, but apparently it wasn't enough for her. She needed to escape, to find some thrill, and Chris was her distraction. At first I was stunned. My mind couldn't process it. How long had she been doing this? Was the affair ongoing? Did she even care about her health, risking everything for some guy? I felt a mixture of rage, heartbreak, and betrayal so intense it was almost physical. I wanted to scream, to cry, to shake her and demand answers. But I knew I had to stay calm first. I closed her phone, took a deep breath, and started planning how to confront her. I had the evidence, and I knew I couldn't keep pretending everything was okay anymore. I kept her phone hidden, but I was already imagining what I'd say, how I'd catch her in her lies. The thing is, I never thought my wife would betray me like this. She always acted so confident, so bitchy when I called her out on small things. Now I saw her for what she really was, someone who would lie, cheat, and screw around behind my back while I was trying to get better from this damn disease. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I was about to find out how deep this betrayal really went and what I was willing to do about it. The confrontation was inevitable now. I couldn't keep pretending I hadn't seen the messages, the photos, the lies. I spent days just staring at her, trying to decide how to approach it, how to frame it without losing my head. Every time I looked at her, I felt this overwhelming mix of disgust and heartbreak. She was so different from the woman I thought I knew, the woman I fell in love with. One evening, I finally decided to confront her. I told her I needed to talk, and I wasn't leaving until I got the truth. She looked at me with that same bitchy smirk she always threw on when she was annoyed, like I was just a pest bothering her. "What now, Mark? Can't you see I'm busy? Some of us have jobs, you know," she snapped, rolling her eyes as if I was the one ruining her day. I pulled out her phone and placed it on the table between us. Her face instantly changed. Her eyes widened and her attitude shifted. She knew I had more than enough to prove what I'd found. I looked her straight in the eyes and said, "Who is Chris, Lisa? Care to explain these messages?" Her face froze, her usual sass evaporating for a moment. Then she quickly recovered, scoffing, "It's nothing, just some flirtation, Mark. You're overreacting." Overreacting? I'd seen enough to know this was more than a flirtation. This was a full-blown affair. I felt my fists clench and I fought the urge to scream at her. Instead, I just asked, "Are you cheating on me, Lisa? During all this time you've been testing that experimental treatment, you've been with him." Her eyes flickered with anger and she looked at me like I was the one who was crazy. "You don't know what you're talking about," she spat, crossing her arms. "You're just jealous because I'm out there trying to find a cure for my illness and all you do is sit around and accuse me of bullshit. Chris is just a guy who helps me blow off steam. That's all. You're making a mountain out of a molehill." That was her usual line, denying, lying, twisting things around to make herself look innocent. But I wasn't buying it anymore. I told her I'd seen enough, that I knew she'd been sneaking around for weeks. The evidence was right there. Her response was to call me paranoid, to say I was imagining things, that I was trying to control her. It was classic Lisa, always deflect, always lie, always turn the tables when cornered. But I could see the cracks in her veneer. She was panicked, trembling even, trying to hold her composure. That's when I realized I'd pushed her far enough and I could feel the anger boiling inside me. In that moment, something snapped. I felt so betrayed, so furious. I wanted to hurt her as much as she'd hurt me. Not physically, at least I hope not, but emotionally. I told her I'd gather all the proof I could and I'd make sure she paid for what she'd done. My mind raced with plans, how to expose her, how to make her understand that I wasn't going to be played like a fool. But underneath all that anger there was also deep sadness. I loved her, or at least I thought I did. Now I wasn't so sure anymore. How could someone I trusted so completely turn around and do this? How could she lie so easily? For a moment I wondered if this was the end of us, if I should just walk away and forget her. But part of me wanted to fight, to prove that I still mattered, that I deserved honesty and respect. The next few days were a whirlwind. I started digging deeper. I contacted her doctor, who was surprisingly unhelpful, brushing me off with vague reassurances about her health. But I knew better. I found out she'd been participating in a series of research protocols, the kind that required her to be in the hospital for long hours, getting tested, taking experimental drugs. And then I realized her schedule had changed dramatically right around the time I began noticing her strange behavior. The protocols were being altered. Suddenly, her visits required her to be there during all my treatments. That's when it clicked. She wasn't just testing the medication, she was testing me. She was involved in some scheme, I was sure of it, and her presence during my treatments wasn't just coincidence. It was her way of watching, maybe even manipulating the process. I'd read about these research trials, how sometimes the protocols could be twisted to serve someone's hidden agenda. And Lisa, she was right in the middle of it. Testing her experimental drug wasn't enough for her anymore. They were using her as part of some scheme, and she was in on it. I felt sick, like I had been played from the start. My hope for a cure had become their opportunity. All this time I'd been fighting for my health, and she was out sleeping with some guy and possibly aiding in some shady research scheme behind my back. That's when I made my decision. I was done trying to understand her lies. The betrayal was too deep. I decided I'd gather all the evidence I could, then confront her again, this time with the intention of ending it. I would expose her for what she was, a liar, a cheat, and someone who'd used my illness as some kind of cover to indulge in her secret life. It was time for her to face the consequences. I started to piece everything together: the altered research protocols, her increased presence during my treatments, her secretive phone habits. It wasn't just an affair, it was a calculated scheme. I couldn't believe I'd been so blind, so trusting, while she played me like some pawn in her twisted game. The more I dug, the more I realized how deep her lies went. One night, I got hold of some official documents from the hospital. They listed the research protocols, and I cross-referenced the dates she was supposed to be there. Sure enough, her schedule had been altered right when she started acting strange. She wasn't just testing her medication, she was testing me. I didn't know what her plan was, but I could tell she was involved in something shady, possibly even illegal. I felt this cold rush of anger and disgust. How could she use my illness as a cover for her lies? How could she betray me so blatantly? I knew I had to do something. I couldn't keep hiding from the truth. I decided I'd confront her again, but this time with everything laid bare. I wanted her to see that I knew everything, her lies, her affair, her scheme. I wanted her to understand that I wasn't going to let her get away with it. So I set up a meeting at our place, pretending I wanted to talk about the future, about rebuilding trust. But really, I was prepared for the fallout. When she arrived, her bitchy smirk was still there, like she thought she was untouchable. I laid out everything I'd discovered, the altered protocols, the messages, the photos, the documents. Her face went pale, then she started to spin a web of lies. "Mark, you don't understand. It's not what you think. I was just helping with the research. Chris is just a friend, and those messages, he's just someone I talk to. You're overreacting, you're jealous, and you're paranoid. I've been trying to protect you from the truth." I was stunned. Honestly, I thought. She'd deny everything outright, but her words were so pathetic, so transparent. She was trying to gaslight me into believing I was crazy. That's when I lost it. I told her I wasn't buying her bullshit anymore. I told her I knew she'd been cheating on me and manipulating the research protocols to cover her tracks. I explained how I'd seen her schedule change, how she'd been lying about her whereabouts, and how I'd uncovered her affair. Her reaction was to go ballistic. She started yelling, calling me all sorts of names: jealous, insecure, stupid. She accused me of spying, of invading her privacy. She screamed that I didn't understand her sacrifice, her illness, and how she was doing this for us. But I wasn't having any of it. I told her I didn't want her lies anymore, that I was done being played. She stormed out that night, furious and crying. I sat there, feeling a strange mix of relief and heartbreak. Part of me wanted to fight for her, to believe her lies, to keep pretending everything was okay. But I knew the truth now. She'd been cheating, scheming, and using her illness as a cover for her own selfish needs. Over the next few days, I felt like I was walking in a fog. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, her lies, her betrayal. It hurt worse than I ever thought possible. How could someone I loved so deeply turn into this stranger? How could she be so selfish, so reckless? I kept asking myself if I was overreacting, if maybe I was just jealous or paranoid. But deep down, I knew the reality was worse than I could admit. Eventually, I reached a breaking point. I couldn't keep pretending that I could fix this, that she'd suddenly change. I realized I had to choose myself, my health, and my sanity over her lies. I made the decision to end things, not just because of the affair, but because I couldn't trust her anymore. The betrayal cut too deep. Now I'm left to pick up the pieces. I don't know what's next, but I do know this: I never thought I'd be the guy who gets cheated on, especially not by someone I loved. But here I am, staring at the ruins of what I thought was a future together. I've learned a hard lesson about trust, about how some people will use your kindness and your vulnerabilities against you. And honestly, I don't know if I'll ever fully recover from this. But I do know I won't let her destroy me completely. After she left that night, I stayed up until dawn, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in my mind. The betrayal felt like a punch to the gut that I couldn't recover from. All those months, I'd been fighting my own health issues, trying to stay positive, trying to hold on to hope. Meanwhile, she was out there, betraying me, using her illness as a cover, and scheming with some guy. It felt like my whole world was crashing down around me, and I was powerless to stop it. I remember feeling numb, like I was just going through the motions. I couldn't cry anymore. All I could do was sit there and process the devastation. The worst part was realizing how much I'd trusted her, how much I'd believed in us. I kept asking myself where I went wrong, if I was just blind, or if she had some kind of plan all along. Deep down, I knew the answer was complicated. She'd been lying so smoothly for so long, I'd been too blind to see the signs. The days that followed were a blur. I started gathering everything I could: screenshots of her messages, copies of the research protocols, her schedule, and even some of her financial records. I needed proof, something concrete to show her, to make her realize she couldn't keep hiding behind her lies. I wasn't planning to ruin her life, but I wanted her to understand how badly she'd messed up. At work, I kept pretending everything was fine. Inside, I was falling apart. My health was deteriorating faster than before, probably because of the stress and sleepless nights. Every morning felt like I was dragging myself out of bed just to get through another day. I'd never been the emotional type, more of a doer, but this betrayal broke something inside me. The trust I'd built over years was shattered in a matter of weeks. One day, I decided to contact her doctor. I needed to know if her participation in the research program was as secretive and manipulative as I suspected. I called the hospital, pretending to be her acquaintance, and asked about her treatment schedule and her current involvement. To my surprise, the doctor was surprisingly vague, dodging questions and giving me canned reassurances. That's when I realized the protocols had been changed without my knowledge or consent. She'd been testing some experimental drugs for her degenerative disease, and I'd been completely in the dark about it. It hit me hard. Her illness, which I'd been trying to support her through, was now being weaponized against me. The research wasn't just about finding a cure, it was about using her as a pawn, testing experimental treatments while she played her little game of deception. I felt sick to my stomach. All this time I'd been fighting for her, hoping she'd get better. Meanwhile, she was betraying me, testing the limits of my trust, all under the guise of her so-called treatment. It was a lot to take in. I started to see how her scheme was tied to her affair. She'd been sneaking around, using the research protocols as cover. The altered schedules, the secret meetings. I was convinced she was working with Chris or some other guy, and the whole thing was a way for her to escape her reality, too. Find some thrill outside of her illness and our relationship. The fact that she'd been willing to risk her health and mine for some affair just made it all so much worse. I remembered how she had yelled at me, called me jealous and paranoid, accusing me of trying to control her. But now I saw it clearly. She'd been the one controlling everything. The research, the lies, the affair. I'd been just a pawn in her game. That realization made me feel even more betrayed, more disgusted. I decided then that I couldn't stay silent anymore. I needed to confront her again, face her lies head on. I planned to tell her I knew everything, that I had enough proof to end it all. I wanted her to see that I wasn't the fool she'd thought I was. I knew I had to do it soon, before she got wind of what I'd uncovered and tried to cover her tracks even more. So I set up a meeting. I told her I wanted answers, that I'd been given some disturbing information about her research involvement and her relationship with Chris. When she arrived, she was furious, trying to dismiss everything, saying, I was ruining everything, but I wasn't having it. I laid out the evidence, screenshots, documents, the altered schedules, and watched her crumble under the weight of it. Her reaction was pure panic. She started to scream, to call me all sorts of names, saying I was crazy, that I'd ruined her life. She told me she was doing this all for us, that her illness was a burden she couldn't bear, and that Chris was just a distraction, not some evil mastermind. But I knew better. I knew she was lying again, just like always. That's when I realized I'd crossed a line. I couldn't keep pretending she was innocent anymore. She was manipulative, selfish, and dangerous. That night I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief because I finally knew the truth, and sadness because I'd lost the woman I loved. I didn't want to believe she could do this, but I saw her for what she really was, a liar, a cheat, and someone willing to risk everything for her own selfish needs. I knew I had to move on, that I couldn't keep living in the shadow of her lies. But I also knew this was just the beginning of a long, painful process of healing and rebuilding my life. After that confrontation, everything changed. I felt like I'd been hit by a truck, but at the same time, I finally saw everything clearly. The woman I thought I knew was just a mask she'd been wearing. The trust I'd built with her, the love I'd felt, all of it was shattered. Still, I knew I couldn't let her control the narrative anymore. I had to make some decisions, immediately. I spent the next few days gathering all the evidence I could find, screenshots of her messages, copies of the hospital protocols, her altered schedule, even some financial records that hinted at her secret meetings. I knew I needed to be strategic. If I wanted to make her face her lies, I had to have everything documented and in order. I couldn't risk her spinning some story that I was just jealous or paranoid again. I needed cold, hard proof. Meanwhile, my health was declining. The stress was taking a toll on me and I was feeling weaker each day. I'd always been a pretty resilient guy, worked out, stayed active, but this betrayal shook me to my core. I realized I'd been fighting so hard just to survive, and now I was fighting to keep my sanity intact. I had a decision to make, whether to keep trying to salvage this mess or to cut my losses and walk away. One afternoon, I made up my mind. I was going to confront her one last time, but not just with accusations. I wanted to tell her that I knew everything, that I was done playing her game. I wanted her to understand that her lies had consequences, that her betrayal had broken whatever fragile trust we once had. I decided to give her a final chance to come clean. If she chose denial, then I was done. I set up a meeting at my place. She showed up furious, trying to dismiss everything I'd said, insisting she was innocent, that I had no real proof. But I threw everything on the table: screenshots, schedules, the research documents. Her face flickered with panic. Her usual bitchy attitude was replaced by guilt and anger. She started to stammer, then to scream. "You don't understand. This is about us, about saving me. You're just jealous, insecure, trying to control me." I looked at her, tired but resolute. "No, Lisa, this is about trust and you've lost it all. You've been lying, cheating, and scheming behind my back. You used my illness as a cover for your affair and your schemes. I can't do this anymore. I don't want a partner who manipulates and deceives me. I want honesty and I want respect. And I'm done with your lies." Her response was to charge at me, screaming, crying, accusing me of trying to ruin her life because I was jealous and weak. She said I'd never understand her struggles, that her illness made her do things she wouldn't otherwise. But I didn't want to hear it anymore. I told her she had to leave, that I wanted her out of my house, out of my life. I told her I was going to report her involvement with the research to the hospital, that I'd make sure she faced the consequences. She stormed out, cursing me, calling me a bastard, a jealous fool. I sat there, exhausted, emotionally drained, but finally feeling a bit of relief. I'd taken back control. I'd faced the betrayal head-on and refused to let her manipulate me anymore. It was the beginning of the end of our relationship. In the days that followed, I started to process what had happened. I reached out to some friends and family, told them everything, and got support. I knew I needed to focus on my health now, on recovering from the physical and emotional toll she'd taken on me. I also knew I had to rebuild my life piece by piece. Trust was gone, but I still had my dignity and my strength. Looking back, I realize how much I learned from this nightmare. Trust is fragile and betrayal can come from the most unexpected places. Never ignore the red flags, no matter how much you love someone. Be cautious, be vigilant. Because once it's gone, it's almost impossible to get back. And sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself is walk away, even if it hurts like hell. I don't know what the future holds, but I know I'll be better off without her. I'll find a way to move on, healthier, wiser, and more cautious. And maybe someday, I'll be able to trust again. But for now, I'm just focusing on healing and making sure I never get blindsided like this again. The hardest part after she left was dealing with the silence. The house felt emptier than ever, and even though I was relieved she was gone, I couldn't shake this gnawing sense of loss. Not just for the relationship, because that was gone, but for the person I thought I knew. The woman I married, who once seemed so confident, so strong, had turned out to be someone entirely different. I kept replaying everything, trying to figure out where I went wrong, if I missed some warning signs, if I should have seen this coming. But deep down, I knew sometimes people hide who they really are behind a veneer of charm and bitchy bravado. In the weeks that followed, I focused on myself. I reached out to my doctor, made sure my health was a priority. The stress from all this had taken a toll, but I was determined to get better. I also started therapy, just talking to someone about everything, about betrayal, heartbreak, and the anger that lingered. It helped to get all these feelings out and gain some perspective. I realized I'd been so focused on her, on fixing her, that I'd neglected myself. That had to change. Gradually, I began rebuilding my life. I got a new routine, reconnected with friends I'd pushed aside, and started to let go of the bitterness that threatened to consume me. I still felt the sting of betrayal, who wouldn't? But I was learning to accept it, to forgive myself for trusting too easily. I also kept my guard up, knowing now that people aren't always what they seem. That trust is something you earn, not just give away. The most surprising thing was how much better I felt once I let go of the anger and resentment. I realized I'd been carrying this weight around for so long, thinking I could fix everything, but sometimes walking away is the best choice. Not because I was a coward, but because I was protecting myself. I learned that sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes it's about survival, about knowing when to cut your losses and move on. Looking back, I don't regret the journey. It's made me stronger, more cautious, and more aware of what I deserve. I now know that honesty and respect are the foundation of any relationship, and without them, everything falls apart. I hope this serves as a warning to anyone out there. Trust your instincts, pay attention to the red flags, and don't be afraid to walk away if someone's lies threaten to ruin you. As I sit here writing this, I realize I'll be okay. Maybe someday I'll find someone who truly values me, who's honest and loyal. But for now, I'm just grateful that I finally see the truth, that I can survive even the deepest betrayal. I've learned that no matter how much you love someone, you can't fix a broken trust. Sometimes you just have to let go and pick up the pieces. And I will. Because I've got a second chance now, a new beginning, and that's worth more than any lie or betrayal.